Okay, now that we have most of our model ready, we should be ready to now add in our terrain, right? So what you can see here is that pretty much I have most of the outer shell of my building, right? You can see for some of the walls I have foundations and and my stairs are in the major stair. So I have the main entrance stair here, I have this curved stair here. This one will be interesting because this one needs to actually follow the terrain, and I have this side stair that is in. You can see it coming from outside the building, and now I'm pretty much ready to start creating my terrain, which is a major feature of this building. As you can see from the drawings, this building actually sits quite uniquely on the terrain. So in order to create our terrain, we are going to need to download this drawing from the mirror board or have this drawing ready. And as you can see, this drawing has the actual heights and, more importantly, the shape of these individual terrain lines, right? Now, when you get a drawing from a surveyor, it will look something like this, but it will tend to have even more details than what we're seeing here. This topo has been specially modified for the purpose of doing this this assignment, right? So it is really just stripped down to the bare bones information that we need in order to create our terrain, right? It has similar information to that of a surveyor, but for the purposes of our project, we're only going to concentrate on the actual shape of the terrain lines. So you can actually see the actual lines that do have a shape. You can see how it curves a particular way, and this curved nature actually allows it to to conform to the elements that run on the site. So for example, if you look in this area here, you can see how these terrain lines actually start to form where our steps go. So the shape of these lines will actually be very important so that the stairs actually fall nicely on these contour lines. Now, the truth is that in some cases, you will get contour lines like this where everything is nicely organized. But in other cases, you may get existing contour lines, right? So, for example, these contour lines represent what is actually there now, but sometimes the surveyor will actually give you contour lines minus the buildings, minus the stairs, minus most proposed architectural works. So as you can clearly see how the contours kind of conform to where the stairs are, you know, in this case. In some cases, unless this is an existing stair, these contours would actually just continue straight like that, representing what is actually on the site before the stairs came into existence. Now, in cases like that, you might have to modify or carve the contours in order to allow them to form around the model. However, in this case, we're not going to do that advanced work. In our case, we actually have the shape of the contour, considering that the stairs has actually already been carved into these contours. So as long as you guys follow these contour lines, your stairs should relatively land right on top of your contour base. Now this is going to be especially true when it comes to the curved stair, right? And you can actually see the curved nature of these contour lines actually kind of curving to show you where that stairs would go. So it's going to be very important that you actually trace the exact curvature of these contour lines and heights so that your stairs will land nicely there. All right, so to get going, what we're going to do is actually start the procedure of tracing these lines. Now, as I said, we need to actually have this model, have this drawing in our actual model. So we're going to switch to the site view, and for this purpose we're going to actually switch to true north. While in true north, because when we actually import this contour plan, you can see that the building is actually also true north on this contour plan. All right, so I'm going to adjust this building, pretty much just scale it. So what I'm going to do is match the footprint of the building to the contours that we have here, right? And I'm just gonna kind of eyeball it here. And now the interesting thing about contours is by their very nature, contours are really organic. So what does that mean? That means that unlike vector lines, so for example, all these drawings that we're doing now are actually made up of lines and vectors. They have very precise positioning and lengths. However, contours have some degree of accuracy, plus or minus accuracy in them, because contours really represent the earth or the surface of the earth, and that is a very organic thing. So for example, if I'm tracing these contour lines, don't get hung up on these exact angles here, because in the big scheme of things, they don't really, what really matters with contours is the height. The shape, we can roughly estimate the shape. However, especially when you're creating contours, it's a good idea to not get too hung up on the exact millimeter representation of these contours, because they are really representing something that is organic, and because it is organic, you technically cannot measure that. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to align our building footprint, so that should get us where we need to be. And in order to do that, we're going to just scale this really quickly. So I'm going to click on our building here. I'm going to click scale, and I'm going to go from right here and go to here. Now this is a process that we actually did already, so I'm not going to spend much time doing that. All right, so that's pretty much our contours. Now what we actually need to do is to trace these lines to first create our actual contour lines, and then we'll worry about how do we cut out the building, and then we'll also do the hardscaping, which is the walkways and pathways that we see around our building here. Now to get going on our contours, the first thing we want to do, now that we have the building scaled, is we really don't want to see all of the building in our scene yet, right? We want to see only the contours so that we get that drawn first. So to do that, I'm going to actually click on our contour drawing, and I'm going to use the isolate tool, which is located there. So I'm going to click that. I'm going to go to the isolate element. So now I have just the contour drawing isolated. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to head over to massing and site, right? And then we actually, when we're here, we want to now draw a topo surface. All right. So we're going to click Topo Surface. Now, here's where the important part comes into play. Now, we actually need to be watching our elevation and matching that with the height that's represented here. While we do that, we also want to be placing the points according to how these lines are actually drawn. You will see these lines. We want to be tracing it relatively accurate, right? And we'll see what we term as relatively accurate. Now, in some cases, it is possible to convert lines that is given to you in a digital format to contour lines. But in our case, we're working with a analog, we're working with a JPEG. So in our case, we don't have these lines digitally, so we will have to trace them. And guess what? In many cases, this will be the scenario. And the thing about it, even if you're given contour lines as a DWG or vector, it's always a good idea here to trace them, because you get more control when you create your own contour points, especially for your drawing. So it might seem tedious, but it definitely helps you in the long run when you need to modify lines, and especially in certain areas, for example, where we have the curved stairs and we have the straight stairs, and perhaps some areas where that intersects the building, we're going to need some flexibility in order to manipulate the contours at those points. All right, so to get going, the first thing we want to do is ensure that our level is at 0, because as you can see from the drawing, if we look at one of our sections here, we can see where the ground plane is where the contour really starts, and then you can see that contour line starts to rise up as we go forward, right? So we want to ensure that our ground plane is going to be at elevation 0. And another thing that we want to ensure is when dealing with contour lines, we are going to need to establish I would say the drawing extents to how far we want the contour to stretch. That is our first line that we want to draw. So for example, I'm going to go to create point, make sure that is selected, make sure that it is on level 0, and then I am going to actually create these points on the outside of my drawing, like about right there. Now once I have that created, that I'm basically just defining where the edges of my contours will be. Now I can always go in and edit this later, but you want to do this so that it encompasses pretty much your entire scene, your 3D scene. Now once you draw this first contour line that's kind of showing the boundary, notice that pretty much you have drawn a slab that is covering your drawing, right? Now that's no worries, we can simply just switch to wireframe mode so that we can see our drawing again. There we go. All right, now the next thing that we're going to do now is actually start from tracing the lowest point and going forward, right? And what basically we're going to do is we're going to repeat the process of setting the elevation, then tracing, setting the elevation, then tracing, and we're going to do that a couple times until we reach the top of these contours. Okay, so let's get going. So at level 0, we're going to actually start tracing these points. Now notice how I'm placing these points here, and this is what I mean by relatively accurate. Especially where the stairs go up, you want to have 2 points. Now you do not want to have too much points. That is very critical. It will make this process even more tedious than it appears. Notice that I'm kind of spacing the point relatively far whenever it's straight, and relatively close, but never too close, right? It's always a good little distance away. All right, so I want to make sure that I'm continuously tracing those points. Now notice that I'm ensuring, I think I made an error there, let me undo. Right, so I need to ensure that I'm sticking to the line that says 0, right? And you have to, when the contours get a little smaller, you want to ensure that you are sticking to these lines here. All right, now once you have that done, you don't need to click on the last point. We simply need to change our height to the next point, which is 305. Press enter, and then we start tracing the next point. Now once you start tracing the next point, you're going to notice like a representation of polygons that kind of appear and disappear, and what REVIT is doing is actually forming the contour lines. Now remember, the stairs, we want a point to be on each side of the stairs, so one here and one here. There we go. All right, and we're pretty much going to trace this around. Now don't worry too much about those polygons, and generally what you want to do is try to line them up a little, not exact, but notice that I'm kind of trying to put the points roughly in the same position as I had for the ground, so you can kind of see them kind of connecting like that. You know, I'm trying to work my way up. No, this is not a must, it's just a best practice. All right, now you're not drawing a polyline here, so you're not trying to like close a loop or something. You're pretty much, so notice I'm back where I started. So now the next one is 610, so I'm going to switch my height to 610, and I'm going to start to trace this as well. Two points as usual when you get to the stairs, and pretty much we're going to repeat this process all the way through. Now you can see why I say you don't want to have too much points. If you have too much points, this process will be tedious, but if you have too little points, your terrain is going to be a bit inaccurate, and it's not gonna represent correctly when you cut your sections. It's gonna be very not so accurate. All right, so don't get confused with these lines. That's also important. You want to make sure that you are tracing on the right lines. Okay, so the next one is 914, and we're going to continue with that procedure. Now what's actually happening is that the terrain is actually being built. You're not seeing it quite just yet, but if for example you switch to a 3D view, you can kind of see how your terrain is coming along. You can see it's gradually being built. So as you click these points at different heights, REVIT will gradually mold that terrain as you go forward. So let's go back to my site view, and I'm going to continue. So I was at 610, so I want to make sure that I'm sticking to the 610 line, as things can get a little tight. Sorry, not at the 610, I'm at the 914. All right, so things can get a little tight, and you don't want to get these lines mixed up. Let me go back to place point here. All right, you don't want to get these lines mixed up, so try to not get confused as you place these lines. Now pretty much you're going to repeat this for each line. Now as you start to build the area with the stairs, now this is going to be important, you want to try and have 2 points where you can see the contours indicating the stair. one at each side of the stair. So 1, 2, and then I can continue drawing. Now don't worry about the accuracy, as I said, too much. Don't get caught up, and for example these little dips here, you're not trying to create like that. Is going to be insane, and it's just going to give you a whole lot of trouble. At the same time, you're not trying to click this point here and that point there. No, you have to form out your curves, especially the areas that curve. After you do it for a while, you get a bit used to it. And I know that some of you might be thinking, this is actually too tedious, but actually the payoff is when you're done and you start to cut your sections and put in all of your landscaping elements, because you would have had your contours properly drawn. Okay, so the next one is 1219. And pretty much this process will continue until you get to the top view. Alright, now once you have this all traced out, it should look something like this, right? Which looks like a little bit of a mess, but of course, if I should switch back to shaded view, you will see where you have actually created the terrain, and in 3D view you will actually see where it is now meshing with the building. Now you might notice some areas might be a little off, like where the stairs is. This is to be expected. As I said, a terrain is a very organic thing, so we're going to actually go in and correct those as we go along. But notice that also, for example, here there's actually an entrance that is here, and some areas will have to be cut out of the terrain, which we will do that but right after we kind of tweak the terrain. Now first thing we want to do is to kind of clean up these areas that may not be meshing right with our stairs. And in order to do that is just to kind of understand what is happening with the terrain lines here. Now you have two ways that you can clean it up. You can clean it up from a 3D view if you can kind of navigate these points. They might look a little bit confusing. So for example, this point here, it's at the right height, but it perhaps needs to be pushed back a little more, right? And the interesting thing about this is that you can't really see all the points. So you're going to have to go to wireframe mode and just kind of estimate where these are to go and just kind of push them back a little so that they intersect with the stairs a little less, right? Now you don't want to change the height, you actually just want to manipulate them a little bit, right? Now another way that you can do this is by doing it in plan view. So I switch to plan view here, or I can go to the site view here. Actually we need to have the model, so this plan view is perhaps better. We can get a better look at how this intersects with the stairs, and in some cases we can see the points. If I highlight this here, I can drag this back a little. I can kind of see the next point here. I think it's actually hiding behind this point, so I'm gonna need to switch to let's see, I'm gonna need to definitely switch to wireframe to be able to select these points and move them. Actually, let's go to shaded and let me see if I can grab them. Yes, I can kind of grab them if you know where they are. Now this is why I was saying that you want to ensure that these points are on the edges of your stair, and I know that you're pretty much going to be modifying, oh, I can't see this point here, that's a problem. You're pretty much modifying the terrain a little bit, but that's okay. It's a fluid thing. To get to this point here, I'm gonna have to switch to wireframe mode and just grab that point there and just grab this point, can carry that up. There we go, so that's coming out nicely. You also want to look at it in 3D to make sure that it's working out nicely, and you can kind of see how you're molding the terrain. Now there were a few areas here, as we can see, that needed to be adjusted. So I'm going to switch to my plan view. And I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to grab some of these points and kind of pull them back a bit. I can't see the points under this, so I'm going to switch to wireframe. And I want to be dragging them on the outside of the stair, right? I don't want to have any points in the stair. You can kind of see the outline of the stair here. So you want to mainly have them on the outside of the stair here. Now, as I said, don't worry too much about the contour lines that you traced. Because in reality, if you think what happens to a contour to the surface of the earth, it normally gets molded by bulldozers and you know, landscape, hardscaping. So it's an organic thing that will change to adapt to the building. So that's basically what you're representing here. You're kind of simulating what would happen in reality anyway. And you're not changing the entire terrain, but just where your proposed building will modify the terrain, which is what happens in reality. So we can see how this terrain nicely follows the stairs, so that is great. And some of you might have more cleaning up to do than others, but basically you want it to be kind of like that. All right, now that that's done, we need to actually cut out the areas that need to be modified. So as you can clearly see, if I grab I'm going to choose OK on with massing on site. So once I choose OK, I've confirmed the landscape. Now if I grab my section box and I kind of drag this like that, you can see clearly that the terrain is also inside the building. So obviously we don't want that to be, so we're going to start to cut out these areas inside the building, and we're going to do that using a building pad. All right, so to do that, we're going to switch to preferably the lowest level, so the level 1 or the site level, whichever one. On my site level, I had hid the building, so I'm just going to come out of isolation mode by resetting temporary isolation. So that's my building there. And basically, I think I'm going to use the wireframe view, because what I need to do now is actually determine what areas should not have earth. So I'm actually going to hide my terrain view, my terrain plan. I don't need that anymore. And I can see where, for example, inside my building, I definitely do not want to have any terrain there. There's an actual entrance that's going to be somewhere here, so this area needs to be cut out, and also below this level here needs to be cut out, and also this area with the stairs here needs to be cut out all the way up to here. Right, so I'm going to need to start cutting these areas out of my model. Now to start to do that, I'm going to actually go back over. Let's click on the site here. Okay, great. So I'm going to head over to massing and site, and I'm going to create what's called a building pad. And the building pad essentially is, most of us have done subtraction before, so it's basically subtracting elements of the site, as you can see in this kind of preview, and making it completely flat based on a level. So we're going to click building pad, and how this works, it's simply sketching out the area that you want to be cut, right? So for example, and we can always edit this sketch later on, so we don't need, it's not written in stone. Now we can, so for example, if you know this is the outside wall of the building, so that is where the terrain should basically stop, on the outside parts of these buildings. So we're going to need our building pad to excavate everything that is inside right up until that wall edge, right? And that is what the building pad will do. So we're going to choose our line tool here, and we're going to say, okay, so this wall definitely we want to excavate up to. Now we know that there's a section that needs to be cut out of here. We don't know the exact dimensions of it just yet, but we know that we're going to need to be cutting everything up to that point there. So all of this section is going to need to be cut out. I'm going to just adjust that like that and join this up. And I think this would come up to somewhere up to this wall here. And then it actually, let's select these two lines, it actually kind of opens up like this, like that. So that area is here. Let's look at it in true north. So as you can see, this area here is excavated. That's what we're doing there. Now we haven't drawn in this wall as yet, right? This is more of a custom wall, but we can always edit this building pad. So we're going to use the whole REVIT revise it method. So we're just going to put in a sketch of it, and then we will revise it as we detail out this model, right? All right, now I'm going to continue to excavate all along here. Now the interesting thing is that you can kind of see where the site kind of comes around. You can see these building, the terrain actually comes around here, and this is a bit funny because we actually don't want that to happen. As a matter of fact, we're going to need this excavation line that's here to actually come out to this section here, because we want to actually be excavating all of this earth that's going to be here. So I might follow the building line here, obviously, because we don't want to have earth going in the building, but we do need to excavate straight out so that we don't have any earth going inside of this area right here. And to demonstrate that, you can kind of see that in towards the back of the building, which you can kind of see here. You can see where the earth kind of needs to stop there, because we don't want the earth to come all the way up to the building, but instead we want to excavate that little point there. Also notice that we have a retaining wall here, so all of this earth needs to be excavated out that area as well. So that area is actually over here. So we're going to be having to watch this closely. Now here we go. So we're going to excavate along this line here, along this line here, but we need to continue excavating all the way until we get out to here, and then we're going to join up back right here. So we're going to just trim this. All right, so based on what we can see here, all of inside of this area here is going to be excavated, which is exactly what we want to happen. All right, so continuing with what we're doing here, we need to now continue excavating up in this area here. So we're going to grab my line tool, and we're going to come all the way up to here. We're going to stop actually, and this area is a little funny because we actually are not going to excavate to this line, but we actually need to excavate to this line here. Now what do I mean by that? You can kind of see it happening here, where the earth is actually going underneath the step, right? You can see that a little clearer in the section that is here. you can see that the earth comes right underneath the step up to this wall. So the earth doesn't actually stop here. It goes below this stair. That's right here. And that's really an interesting feature of this building, right? So, you know, we ideally we would be excavating up until this point here, because the earth should be actually flowing underneath the stairs as it goes upwards. All right. Now, as for the front part of the building, we should actually be excavating up to this curve wall here. All right. So, all of this area that is inside here, all of this area, that's actually building. That's actually a part of the building. You know, if you look on the drawings and on the images, you can see where you actually enter into the lower part of the building here. You can walk here and go down this passage here. So all of this section needs to be excavated up to that point as well. So we're gonna use the pick line feature to actually pick the outside of this curve line, which is the edge of our stair, like that. Then we're gonna pick this line here. So then we're gonna trim it up. So we're gonna go from here to here and from here to here. Yep, I believe that's so. And then we're gonna join this up here like that, and then we're gonna trim this up here. So this is why it's important that we have our building footprint before we actually start to create our landscape, because we can actually see where we should cut out. You can kind of see it there in that within that line space, that pink line there, where we should actually cut out of the site. And you know, we would need the stairs to be in so that we can confirm that everything is okay with our terrain as well. So that's why it's important to actually have most of the building silhouette walls as much as you can in. We don't need to have the doors and the windows, primarily just the major structural elements like the columns and the major load bearing walls, and there's not much interior walls, so I just choose to add in these walls. All right, so once we have that done, then we're going to choose OK, and then you can see where the terrain actually stop at these points. So we can look at that in 3D, and now you can see where the building pad has actually excavated those areas there, and that is exactly what we want to happen. We can also extend this cut. Let's look at what the back looks like. So you can see why we did this area like this, because you can see that we needed to cut all the way to that edge there, and on the other side you can see that we needed to cut to that edge there. All right, so now we pretty much have our main landscape element in. So now we need to add in some hardscape elements like the walkways and so forth. So we can do that with the side view now. Would be a good idea to switch back to hidden line so we can see our building. And now we can also unhide our side plan view. Let's look back in wireframe so we can see it. So we can actually see those walkways, walkway lines. Here they are. You can see them curve like that and curve like that. So these areas that are represented here are actual pathways and walkways and so forth. Now we're not going to pay much attention to those, but we do still need to add in these areas. What I'm suggesting is that we kind of create a virtual boundary so we know how far we want to draw. But we know that those areas surrounding the terrain are actually going to be hardscape, walkway areas. So to do that, we're going to use our floor tool. And this time we're not going to choose level. We need to offset from level 1, because level 1 is going to be on the same level as our terrain. So we need to maybe go up about 6 inches, thereabout, or 150 millimeters to be exact, because we're in metric. And then we're going to use well, I'm actually going to draw this out. So I'm going to put my line tool like that, and up there I'm going to click a 3-point curve to get these curves going. Now or maybe I'll pick this one here. No, maybe let's see if okay, there we go. Curve that like that. And what I'm basically doing now is trying to estimate the edges of my curb. There we go. And I'm just trying to just draw this in real quickly like that. There we go. And this goes up to my stair and outwards again. Now these are landscape elements, so they don't really have, in our case we can just eyeball it and trace that, trace those elements out. There we go. And switch the line. And then again, as I said, I'm really kind of estimating these points here. And I'm kind of determining where are the edges of my curb. There we go. And now I'm back around the front. There we go. All right. So that's one edge, and now I need to do the other edge. So what I'm going to do is just kind of estimate where the edge of where I'm going to be drawing up to. So I think about that point is good, but I'm not done yet, because these are actual walkways here, so I need to actually draw these elements in. Oh, and here's another one here. Let's use this as just one very slight curve, and then we'll go with a deep curve here, and then we'll go with a nice shallow curve here. All right, I think that's about it. Okay, great. Oh, actually there's one more that's here, so I'm gonna go with a curve here and a curve here. All right, great. Now what I'm actually doing now is trying to determine the edges of my walkways. So notice that I'm just kind of clipping this in like this. This one might need to extend some more. Alrighty, and all I'm going to do now is trim these. I'm going to trim that like that, trim that like that. And this is basically the edge of my walkway here. There we go. I'm going to choose OK, and I'm going to say no, don't attach. All right, so let's look at that in 3D now. All right, and there goes our walkways. Let me extend this back out. So now you can see our walkways that's attached to our stair, and we pretty much have most of our landscape and hardscape elements in. All right, now if you get areas like this, what you can choose to do is, it's just based on where you had drawn the building pad. So I could go back to my site view here, and I can actually select this building pad like that and go to edit boundary, and I can edit this and put this on the inside of that wall. There we go. So now when I go to 3D, when I go to my 3D view here, you will see that that's no longer an issue. All right, so that is how we get our basic landscape, well, hardscape and terrain in. The next step we'll start to now include trees and these elements. We don't need to actually add those in just yet. I would now go to the next step in the process, and you can kind of see where we are here in our steps. You know, after we get the hardscape elements in, we want to ensure that we have our model 100% complete in terms of the massing. Now is where we're going to start to add in details in our model first, and then we can expand to add in details in our site. So things like doors, windows, furniture, these panels, all of the smaller details would now need to be added to this BIM model now. All right, so this has been creating the terrain and landscape elements.